Hi there. My name is Scott Larson. I am the creator of the comic book series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. You can get a free copy of the first issue of Visitations by emailing me at visitationscomicbook@gmail.com. Today's the day before Halloween. It is October 30th, 2020. And because we're so close to Halloween, I decided to take a break from some of the comic book stuff or the comic book guests that have been coming on. And instead, I decided that what we would do today is there are different paranormal investigators throughout the country who I happen to know. I have gone to the Chicago Ghost Conference a couple of years, and because of that, it attracts people from different parts of the country, and they all come and they talk about different things. And one of the people I met a number of years ago was a lady named Allison Jornlin, and Allison is the founder of the American Ghost Walks in Wisconsin. She also, and there's a whole bunch of different things concerning that she's going to talk to you a little bit about. But also, she has a couple of different YouTube channels. One of them I found incredibly interesting because I live in Chicago. A number of years ago, we had an adventure here where the infamous Mothman was seen flying around the city. So she went to all the different locations where he had been seen, and she had interviewed people who talked to him. And that stuff is up on one of her YouTube channels. And a couple months ago, she started another YouTube channel, which is even more fascinating than that. Her YouTube channel is the paranormal women, the hidden history of paranormal women, or paranormal women hidden history. I'm sure she's going to correct me as soon as she comes on. And she tells different tales on some of the women who were involved in paranormal studies from the 1800s on, and perhaps even before that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Allison on right now, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that she's working on. Tell us a few ghost stories. Allison, if you can turn on your video. There you are. Hi.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm excellent. And I love the Halloween seasons. Happy Halloween.
Oh, and same to you. So are you really busy this time of the year?
Well, usually I am, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I've had a lot of time off, which is okay. I like to enjoy watching scary movies, and it's okay to stay at home because there are a lot of avenues for historical research into the paranormal that I'm totally all about. So it is a little lonelier this year. We were talking off air about how we miss not being able to go to the Chicago conference. And yeah, I had a lot of great conference dates this year that were all canceled because of the pandemic. So I'm bummed about that, but most of them have been rescheduled for next year. So I'm hopeful about that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how long this goes for because nobody knows for sure.
That's right.
Now, before I start asking you questions, and I figured that what we would do is we could start with the American Ghost Walks. But before we do that, you mentioned Halloween movies. So, what's your favorite Halloween movie?
Oh boy. The Sixth Sense is still good. Um, there are just so many scary movies that you kind of took me off guard. So like every night this week we've been looking at Netflix and trying to find scary movies. So I mean, I hate zombies, other than like the George Romero zombies. I don't do zombies, but other than that, anything paranormal is fair game. What's your favorite movie?
Well, it fluctuates. There's two of them which I doubt. Well, one of them would be classified as Halloween. The other one probably wouldn't, but it is a Halloween movie. I think my favorite is Arsenic and Old Lace with Cary Grant.
Oh, wow.
It takes place on Halloween. And then the other one is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. You can see I'm really into the horror stuff.
I think I saw that. I have seen that in my past. Yeah, and there's some series out now. Like we watched The Haunting of Bly Manor. I thought was really good because it's a reinterpretation of Henry James, The Turn of the Screw, and so I really like what they did with it. It was really beautiful, and I actually cried. So in a good way, in like a loving way. So so it was spooky and also romantic in a strange way. So
Okay. Well, that's
I
the
would
best.
recommend I would recommend that as a Netflix pick.
Okay. So I wanted to start and ask you about the American Ghost Walks. How long have you been doing that?
Okay, so I started our first ghost walk in 2008 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's my hometown. And the reason I did that is because I had always been enamored of ghost stories and of ghost walks, haunted history walks. And anytime I went on vacation, I would go to a city and I'd find out all the haunted stuff. And I'd want to take the haunted history tour if they had a haunted history tour. And my brother and I actually had been into it since we were kids. My mom used to listen to the Chicago radio stations. She listened to WGN a lot. And during Halloween time, they would have Richard Crowe on, who was Chicagoland's ghost hunter. He's unfortunately passed on into the great beyond himself. But growing up, my brother Mike and I always treasured those times with my mom listening to ghost stories of haunted Chicagoland on the radio. And Richard Crowe, I think he really kickstarted this ghost walk thing in the US. In 1973. So that was the same year that the London ghost walks began. So 1973 is really the inception of that kind of paranormal tourism. And so I was really excited about starting one here. And I was able to do that in 2008. And then after that, I talked to my brother who's living in the state capital, Wisconsin, Madison. And I'm like, dude, you gotta do this. You gotta write a haunted history tour for Madison. And I helped him get started with a little bit of research. And then he just like took off with it. And for a while, he was living in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and he started a St. Paul tour and a Minneapolis tour. And then, we have like, I don't know, 13 tours now. We have a lot of tours. Before the pandemic, just after Christmas, actually, we had written and worked on the script for San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we started a tour in San Juan, Puerto Rico just after Christmas. And then just before the lockdown came, this is the pinnacle of success, I think, when you get to jet off to Maui for business. So I went to Maui for a few days, and really it was business, but it's still a tropical paradise, right? So I dug up ghost stories for Lahaina in Maui. And so we were able to start a haunted history tour there in Lahaina. And it's going very well, considering the situation we find ourselves in with this pandemic. Of course, we've been able to run it to small groups. So, but it goes on almost every weekend, and it's been very successful and getting great reviews from the attendees. So we couldn't be more happy about it. And so we have all these tours going, and hopefully the pandemic will go away soon. And because we have a lot of plans for other locations in the United States. And certainly that put a damper on it, what our plans for this year. But once the pandemic lifts, then we're going to just go gangbusters and start tours in many different cities. So we have a lot of great plans, and you can find out about our current ghost walks at americanghostwalks.com.
So that's really interesting, and I want to know about the Maui ghost stories that you've heard. But before I do that, let's back up a little bit. Now, you were talking Richard Crow. And there's a bunch of different stories about him. Now, when I started my comic book, I purposely stayed away from real ghost stories. And I gave the excuse, well, I didn't want the ghosts to come haunt me if they didn't like the way they were portrayed. But
everybody's a critic, even the ghosts.
That's right. That's right. But more than that, it was for lack of a better way to put it, I felt a little lazy about it. I didn't want to put the real stories in there and get it wrong, or have it in, the book is history, but I didn't want to make it about the history of the ghost stories. I wanted it to be a superhero adventure. And as a result, I ended up staying away from those stories until people started asking me about it. And I started talking about them at different comic book conventions. And then I had to learn them. And some of that came from osmosis. And I actually had heard of Richard Crow. Although once I started going to the ghost conventions, I did start finding out about him. And so there's a couple of comments I want to make about him. But before I do, I'm curious about which story he told that popped out at you. What made you really interested?
Well, I loved all the stories, but of course, Resurrection Mary always captures the imagination, because so many people have reported this ghostly hitchhiker throughout the years, and the whole ghostly hitchhiker phenomenon is fascinating, because cross culturally it turns up everywhere. Even in Hawaii, for example, we have the goddess Pele, who will either present herself as a beautiful young woman or an older woman, and it's good fortune for you if you treat her kindly, not so much if you don't. So that's surprising to see things popping up in different cultures that are so disparate. So I guess Resurrection Mary would be the one. And, that story is about this young girl who loved to go dancing at the Willowbrook Ballroom. May it rest in peace. It was there. I got to experience it back in 2016 for the Chicago Ghost.
That's where I met you.
Oh, you did?
Okay. Yes, I was there too. And before I know you're telling a story, and I don't want to interrupt, but
that's okay.
I do want to make a couple of comments about that. I felt that was really weird. I mean, the conference itself was it was different. I hadn't been there, and I was telling Allison before we came on that everybody I met at the ghost conference is like super friendly and super nice. And it's like, yeah, those ghost hunters, they're the nicest people in the world. And I do think that it's true, but there was something really unsettling about that convention and the Willowbrook Ballroom. And 2 weeks later was when the ballroom burned down, which made it even creepier. And I remember I was looking at the reports on my phone, and I was talking to a buddy of mine. He's like, well, that makes the whole thing even freakier than it had been. I'm like, I know. It was really, really strange. So anyway, please continue with your story.
Well, before I go on though, I want to hear, because I enjoyed being there. I had a lot of fun that year. And then at the party, did you go to the party at Chet's Melody Lounge?
No.
Okay, so that was really fun because I forgot his name. One of the Amityville children was there.
Yes, I remember his talk.
Christopher was there, and he actually made this really nice fire for us outside. I never knew that you could like sit outside because it's always been too cold, and it was just a beautiful night, and we were sitting around a roaring fire and we had some great conversations. I don't know, that I felt really warm and snuggly about the conference. I didn't feel any bad mojo coming down. I just felt like the good mojo, and the fire was just I mean, it was just a very comforting thing to have somebody come and build a fire. And I'm not a bar person at all. So I was so glad that I didn't have to like hang around inside a bar. Ugh, I hate that. So to be outside in nature around a fire just seemed so cosmically awesome to me. So I had a great time in 2016. So I wanted to know about what kind of freaky things you were
You know
freaky.
what? It's really funny because I cannot say for sure. Because it was 4 years ago, and it's like 4 years ago, right now seems like about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can tell you about 2017 and what unsettled me at that particular convention, and that was even more unsettling. But I know that there was a lady there who had photos of like dead people that she had found like from the 1800s, and that was a little odd. I mean, it wasn't odd that she was, well, it was odd that she was doing it, but it was a ghost conference. What are you going to do? But the pictures themselves were kind of, they gave you kind of a funny feeling. And I think that some of the stories that were told, and I remember the Amityville horror guy. I mean, Spenguli was there too, but he wasn't really that unsettling. But I think the environment was just, it wasn't that it was a bad environment. It wasn't that the people were unfriendly. It wasn't anything like that. It was more along the lines of the ghosty aspect of it. It's kind of like we've got a couple of different cemeteries here in Chicago, and one of them is Graceland Cemetery, which is over by Wrigley Field, and that's one of the cemeteries that my comic book is based on. And the other one is Rose Hill Cemetery, which is very close to me. It's very close to where I grew up. And I will walk through Rose Hill, and there's something with that place. And I don't know if you've been in there or not.
No, I don't think I have.
But there is something very unsettling about there, and about Rose Hill. And I can walk through there and feel uncomfortable. And it isn't because anybody's doing anything or anything like that, but there's just kind of a strange energy. And I think that that's part of what was happening at the Ghost Convention in 2016. And it's like I said, there was, I think that 2017 was a lot more unsettling. And I can talk about that in a few minutes, although I'm interrupting you from your story. But
no, that's okay. I just love to hear other people's stories.
Well, I'm not a ghost person, which is ridiculous because I'm doing that comic book. And I'm not a horror person. You could tell by my choice of Halloween movies. But I think being surrounded by a lot of this stuff, whether it's the photos of the dead people or the stuff about Bachelor's Grove, for example. Mm-hmm. And there's just, I was standing there, and it was funny because I cornered the market at the Ghost Convention. I'm standing there with my comic book. I'm the only one who has a comic book. And everybody was very friendly. Everyone came over. But I heard a couple of stories about Graceland Cemetery, which were interesting, very interesting. And some of them went into the blog story that I put out yesterday. But Graceland, the Amityville horror guy was interesting as well. Joe Who was there, who I had seen in college. And I'm trying to blank on some of the other talks. I mean, there were things that I found kind of goofy there, and I'm not going to talk about that. Although the memories are coming back, so I'm talking. I'm like, oh,
right.
But don't talk about that. But there is just something about the entire experience, and again, it was 4 years ago, so I can't really place my finger on it all, although I could 4 years ago. And so, like I said, 2017 was a little bit different because that I have very clear memories. I know exactly what scared the crap out of me there. And I'm happy to talk about that. But I want you to continue your story about Resurrection Mary because I have a couple of things to add to it.
Okay, great. Well, I'll do that. And I just want to add before I forget about it, because we had been talking about Halloween movies, and you just reminded me of a good one. Regarding the photos of the dead. I mean, that was a Victorian tradition, and it's still carried on today. There are some photo photographers that will take pictures of the dead, and in some uh, other ethnic communities beyond like mainstream America, it's still done. But in Victorian England, that was a thing, like a remembrance of the dead, to take a photo of them, like that one last photo. And there's a great movie called The Others with Nicole Kidman, and the pictures of the dead are an element of the horror in The Others. So I would recommend that. I thought that was a pretty good movie. It's a good one for Halloween. Yeah, and so Resurrection Mary was just a nice girl who liked to go dancing. And one night on her way home, she was struck by a car and died. And so in that walk home, she was killed. But the idea is that, maybe she didn't know she was dead, or maybe the important things in her life happened to her at Willow Brick Ballroom. So her spirit was always drawn back. And the stories involve her as almost, one of those ghostly hitchhikers that is sometimes picked up on the road, or sometimes met at the ballroom. Sometimes a gentleman would meet her and dance with her, and then take her home, only to have her disappear. There are countless variations on that. One of the variations is that somebody was taking her home, and she wanted to be dropped off at the cemetery, and the Resurrection Cemetery. And then she disappeared behind the gates. And there's
the bar too. The
what
bar,
was that?
and she goes into the bar as well, where you guys had your after party.
Oh yes, the Chet's Melody Lounge.
Right.
Yes, which is right across from Resurrection Cemetery. So there have just been so many stories over decades about Resurrection Mary. So is it true? Is it not true? I don't really know. But that ghostly hitchhiker phenomenon is interesting. I'm not sure if it plays on human psychology in some way. The idea of the unknown, that you're risking your life by picking someone up. This person is unknowable, but you do so, and then they turn out to be something otherworldly. Although she never harms anyone. I mean, she never does anything malicious. She just wants to dance and then go home, and sometimes disappears while you're driving her.
And melt the bars of the cemetery.
Yes. And there was, I'm not sure exactly when that happened. I think that was in the 80s sometime, when someone reported seeing her actually grabbing onto the bars of the Resurrection Cemetery gate. And then supposedly her handprints were like melted into the metal. And then Richard Crowe talked about how the Vatican, wasn't the Vatican, it was the Archdiocese who came in and cut out the parts of the bars that where the handprints were and replaced them. Now, I'm not sure about all that, but it was certainly an entertaining story.
Well, there are photos online of those bars.
Yeah. So you said you have had something to add to the story. So,
I've got a lot to add to the story.
Yeah.
So growing up in Chicago, I'm on the north side. Resurrection Cemetery is way on the south side. It's in for any Chicagoans out there, it's near Justice, Illinois, wherever that is. That's way. And in fact, when I went to the Ghost Conference, I think I had to take a train, like an actual commuter train, and then not an L. And then take like an Uber from there to it was way out there. And but being in Chicago, about Resurrection Mary. If you live in Chicago and you haven't heard of it, you're not getting out enough. And I don't get out at all, and I know. So we know the story. We know it backwards and forwards. And And one of the things that I did when I started going to comic conventions was, people would walk by the table and I'd try to find a way to get them over. And you're in Chicago, ghost stories, they come up. I have a sign that says, ask about haunted Chicago. And so they'd come over and I would say, well, have you ever heard of Resurrection Mary? Have you ever heard of Graceland Cemetery? Have you ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of that? And then I said that. I was in Wizard World Chicago in August of 2016. And this girl named Tessa came by. She's actually one of my favorite fans, and she's a cosplayer. But she came by with a bunch of her friends, and she said, "Well, my mom saw her." And I said, "When did your mom see her?" She saw her a lot. She grew up near Resurrection Cemetery, and she said she was out there all the time. And I thought that was really interesting. And Tessa and I had this long conversation about ghost stories. And then I'm there, and someone else came along, and I said, "Yeah, someone was over here, and they said that their mom saw her." And it was this guy, and he said, "Well, I saw her." He said, "I was a little kid, and we're out driving, my parents and I, and they stopped at the gas station." And he said that he saw this woman across the street from the gas station, and this semi truck came and stopped and picked her up. And when it got to the cemetery, the guy driving the truck slammed on his brakes. So he was going, and then she apparently disappeared, and there was like, and
and he noticed and slammed on the brakes.
Right. So this little boy who was, he told me how old he was at the time, and he was young. He was like 5 or 6, and so he remembered that. He didn't know it was Resurrection Mary until later on. But then the other one was, he walks away, and I'm talking to people, and someone comes up and, "Oh, have you ever heard of Resurrection Mary?" "Oh yeah, blah, 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 blah." And I said, "Well, there was someone here who saw her as a little boy." And this woman says, "Well, that's nothing. My grandfather picked her up."
Some people are one-upping each other with the Resurrection Mary stories.
Yeah, and it's like, if I didn't know better, I would think that they were like, "Hey, why don't you tell this guy over here?" But it's one of those stories that, again, you live in Chicago, you hear about it and you know it. But to actually run into people who had seen it, who'd witnessed
right.
it's a little bit different. And I tend to be very skeptical when it comes to ghost stuff. And part of it is I'm skeptical because, I don't necessarily want to believe it. I think there's enough in real life to be afraid of, let alone having like things floating down from the sky at you. And my sister was really big into that, and I was just kind of like, well, I don't know if I really want to go there. And so I just dismiss it. I have other things to worry about, and that sounds silly, but it's it's kind of the way I felt about it. And I generally don't talk about that because I think that people, and especially people who are interested in the book that I'm doing, or who come up and talk to me because I have the book and they just want to talk about their own personal feelings about it. I have no problem with that. I'm not somebody to say, yes, that's true, or no, it's not. That's none of my business. It just isn't. And I'm always happy to listen to anybody who comes by. But with Resurrection Mary, that story has popped up, and it's just this whole idea of people walking up to me saying, "I saw her when I was a little boy. I saw that." Oh, and there was somebody else too. I almost forgot this story. There were a bunch of teenagers, or a bunch of people who came by who said that they used to hang out outside of Resurrection Cemetery as teenagers, and they said that she was out there all the time. Wow. They said they saw her repeatedly. She was always out there. And I said, "Well, did you ever go say hi?" "Oh, no, we weren't going to do that." They knew who it was, and they stayed away on purpose. But they said that she was out there. Now, going back to Richard Crowe, the thing that I find really interesting about him is, from what I understand, he drove up and down Archer Avenue, where Resurrection Cemetery is. He drove up and down it repeatedly, looking for her in the hopes that she would never saw a thing.
Yeah, you can't make ghosts come on call. But maybe he has his answers now because he's actually buried in Resurrection Cemetery.
Oh, is he buried in? I
Yes,
didn't know he was. I didn't
is.
know he was buried there, but I did know that people have seen him walking around as well.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think Ursula Belsky is the person who runs the Chicago hauntings tours, and she does the Chicago Ghost Conference. And I think that she mentioned it to me that he's been seen
At Resurrection Cemetery or somewhere else?
I think it was somewhere else. I
Okay.
tend to think that he walks into either a coffee shop or a bar to use the bathroom. It was someplace
Wow.
where he was going all the time.
Right. So it must be he must be still giving his tours.
He
If he
might.
has to walk in and use the bathroom. As someone who gives tours now, I understand that that is sometimes necessary. But yeah, he was a really a unique individual, and it was sad to lose him so soon. But it's interesting to think that he still might be around. And I'm with you on the skepticism. I'm very skeptical, but I love hearing people's stories. It's one of my greatest joys in life. That's why we do American Ghost Walks, because we think it's necessary. It's important to have this forum where we can share stories of the past, and we can give people an opportunity who come on the tour to tell their own stories if they feel comfortable to do so. And those are always the tours that are the most fun, are the ones where people feel comfortable enough to share their own stories. Because I think when people tell you a story like that, I mean, they're really trusting you.
Sure.
And it's sacred. It's sacred
Sure it
to
is.
now. People who are watching this might note that, regarding the Chicago Mothman thing, because of my experience going to all the various locations, I had to come out and be very skeptical of that. But that's not to be. I'm not skeptical of the witnesses that actually come forward. I'm skeptical of stories that are put forth without witness information. So, and thankfully, in my own life, after doing this for, being interested and doing paranormal investigation for around 20 years now, I've finally had some of my own experiences, which I can share with you if you'd like.
Oh, sure.
And so that's been exciting to me because, of course, I love to hear the stories, but I always wanted to have my own experience. That's why, over the years, I've been to so many different cities and taken so many ghost tours and stayed at so many haunted places. Anytime I go somewhere, I'm like, let's do all the haunted stuff. I want to stay at the haunted hotel. I want to eat at a haunted restaurant. I want to take the haunted history tour. I want to do it all. And so that's really what motivates me. I think because I've always been interested in the eternal questions of, are we alone? What happens after we die? I want to know this stuff. So if you've ever been on a paranormal investigation, you know how frustrating it could be. A lot of nothing. Many, many, many nights and hours and hours and hours of nothing, nothing, nothing. So that can get pretty disheartening. And then when you find that, there are some people that maybe trump things up or make things up, that makes things even harder. But then when you have your own experiences, you're like, yes, there is something real to this. So I have had a couple of experiences that really stand out. One of them happened about 20 years ago now. And there's in Mequon, Wisconsin, there was an old farmhouse that was turned into a bar and restaurant and had many iterations. Many different businesses were in there. And I had first heard of this place. It was called Club Forest at the time. So I had first heard of Club Forest when I was working at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. I was working in their online division. And I had heard from one of our sales staff. He was going to sell them online ads, and so he came back and he was just full of stories. He was so excited after visiting and saying, this place is haunted, and telling us all the stories. And it was amazing. And then I followed it through the years and like the different owners, and they all had their own experiences. And then one night I was there, and because it was a haunted restaurant, Mexican restaurant, so I had some really good Mexican food. And then where did I go after? Well, I don't drink, but I do go to the bar after, because it's the bartenders that hold the stories. So I went to the bar after and was questioning the bartender like I often do. And up on this tall, high shelf, there was this tray of drinking glasses. And when I walked in, I saw it, on this shelf. And I noticed it. I'm kind of OCD, but I would have noticed if it was like teetering or something like that, right? And then I was positioned across the bar, and then your eyes are never looking at the right thing at the right time. But I was perfectly positioned to see it actually fly. But I saw the aftermath. I didn't see it take flight. But apparently, I'm talking, and I'm looking the bartender in the eye, and then all of a sudden there's this commotion in back of us. And what had happened is this tray of drinking glasses had launched itself off the shelf and made an arc. And I could tell from where it landed in the middle of the floor. It wasn't like right, like it fell down and went, kind of straight down. It was, whoa, way over here. And I was just really startled, and everybody in the bar was like, oh my God, what just happened? And then all the glasses were all smashed on the floor, and the tray was there. And the really frustrating thing is I wish that I would have had a tape measure with me. So now anywhere I go, I take a tape measure, because I could have measured where it started, where it landed. And okay, maybe I couldn't do the math, but I could have found someone to help me do the math to find out how much force it would have taken to end up where it ended up. But now I all I have is a story, because I didn't have a tape measure. And at that time, that's back in 2000, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have anything to document it. And I wish it would have been more proactive about it, really thought about it, and tried to measure it in some way, or maybe investigate everybody on the scene from their different points of view to see what they saw, or to hear about what they saw. But I didn't do that. But that was really one that I can't explain away. A lot of people witnessed it, and to me, there was no natural explanation for it. Now, the other one happened just a few years ago. It was up in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And there's a place there called the Old Baraboo Inn. And they had invited me in to do they wanted a 2-hour presentation about Wisconsin hauntings. It was for some Halloween event. And so I was really excited that they asked me. And I brought my brother along, and he's got a band. So they played, and then we had a podcast, and we had an investigation. We did a whole thing. So, but after my 2-hour talk, I was setting up for the podcast in the other side of the bar room. So there's like 2 bars. There's like one little one where I did my presentation, and then way on the other side, there's another long one, and there's a room, like a dining room to the side. And I was in like the dining room area, and I was just stowing my gear under this table that we had set up for the podcast. It's like a long table for like a panel style podcast. And so I'm just stowing my stuff under there, and I stood up and I looked across the room. Nobody else is in this side of the building with me, unfortunately. So I don't have anybody to verify what I saw, but I know what I saw. I'm standing there, and with my eyes, I see this orb across the room.
Okay.
And it's about the size of a ping pong ball. And it is off-white, not like ping pong ball colored, more like a yellowish tinge. And then it was hanging there. And I was like, what is that? I had time to think, what is that? And look at it. And then it sped up. And it actually zoomed past my ear. And I didn't hear it. I didn't feel it, but I definitely saw it coming at me because I flinched. I mean, I had a very normal human reaction to something being whipped at your head.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that makes it more authentic to me to to see it, to be like, what's that? See it speed up, have it zoom past my head, and then flinch and look around, and then it was gone. And then later on, um, I would find out like a year later. I didn't tell anybody about it that night, which is also weird because you think I would be like, "Oh my god, I saw something," but no, I was just like, I didn't even tell my brother that night. I didn't tell him until that was a Saturday. I didn't tell him until that Monday after I got home from work. I called him and I said, "Oh, by the way, I did see something." And that was interesting to me because I'm all about it. So why wouldn't I talk about it immediately? It's like I needed processing time or something. But I would find out a year later at the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference, incidentally. There was somebody representing the Old Baraboo Inn on a haunted road trip panel. And so she was telling stories about the Old Baraboo Inn. And she told about the owner's former girlfriend, how she often complained when she was in the building about being dive bombed by orbs.
Mhm.
And to me, that was very meaningful because it sounded like what happened to me, but described by another person. I didn't describe it as being dive bombed by orbs, but that's what it sure felt like that this orb was whipping past my head, almost like playing with me. Uh, and so that was exciting to find out that somebody else had had that experience before. And I had not known about that when I had my experience. So, and again, I mean, it's funny when it happens because I'm like, oh my God, this is so lame. I don't want to go around telling people I saw an orb. I don't know what I expected it to be like, but we all have these expectations of things. And then something happens and we're disappointed. And I was disappointed that I don't know, I guess I wanted the full body apparition and orbs. There's a lot of people that have it in for orbs because in pictures on video, there can be some very logical explanations for them.
Sure.
But I have to explain that I saw this with my eyes. And so that is harder to explain away. But anyway, I was kind of embarrassed. Now I got to tell people I saw an orb. But this is what happened. I'm not going to make it better than it was. I'm not going to explain it away. It really happened. I feel like it was an authentic experience. And that's it. That's all I can do with it. I'm not going to try to make it better than it is. I'm not going to explain it away. I'm just going to give you the straight talk because that's how I experienced it.
Um, so I've got a couple of questions about that.
Yeah.
Not about the experience, but about orbs in general. And I'm going to start it by talking about, we going back to 2016 and talking about that Chicago Ghost Conference. There were a lot of people at that convention talking about orbs. Mm-hmm. I had never even heard of them. It shows how far out of the loop I am. But people talked about it a lot, and I was just like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean an orb? What do you mean a ghost light? What is that?" And I know that at a place like Bachelor's Grove here in Chicago or here in Illinois, I guess they're floating all over the place there, from what I understand.
Oh yeah.
But talk a little bit about what orbs are, because you probably have a much better sense than I have.
Yeah. So let me interject and say that, okay, so I have a new YouTube channel. It's called Paranormal Women, A Hidden History. And you can get to it by going to youtube.com/paranormal women. And one of the paranormal women I talk about is Catherine Crowe. She wrote this tremendous book way back in 1848 called The Night Side of Nature. It's 400 pages of just amazing stories about the paranormal and the many different phenomena that make up the paranormal. And one of the things that she talks about here is ghost lights, or corpse candles, as they were known back in the 19th century. So there was people who experienced in the cemetery seeing these lights float above graves, and they were sometimes called corpse candles. And so there are mysterious lights out there, and they have been experienced at cemeteries, but also other places. So we don't know if these are earth lights. That's another possibly related phenomenon where geologic activity through some process we don't really understand produces plasma, and then the plasma takes flight, and then people see it. So there are people like in Iceland, for example, where there's a lot of geologic activity, who even on skeptical shows like Monster Talk, a show that I've been on a lot, but they had one guest who was extremely skeptical, but talked about a vacation in Iceland and was talking about fairies, one of my favorite subjects, or elves as they call them in Iceland. But really it's the same thing, it's fae folk. So he talked about going to this area where people had experienced fairies, and he thought that maybe what people were experiencing were these earth lights. And he actually saw one which was like a orange baseball sized orb that was floating along the road, and he stopped. He tried to get up to it, but there was this huge fence he couldn't get over. And then they went back the next day, and so people see these things. Even very skeptical people see them. What they are, we don't really know. I have a Facebook friend that has been sending me messages. He's an outdoors person, and he lives in the rural South. And he has been telling me about seeing blue lights in the forest, which may be will-o'-the-wisp, which is another fairy thing, possibly an entity, a non-human entity that leads you astray, leads you into the forest to your doom, sometimes. And sometimes it just kind of plays around with you. But, the will-o'-the-wisp is these mischievous lights that are seen in the forest and lead travelers astray. So there are lots of mysterious lights and orbs out there. There's other people that say, in the case of ghosts, that the reason that a ghost might appear as an orb is because that's a very efficient way. A spherical formation is a very like energy efficient way to go around. Apparently, I don't know where they exactly get that information, but it's much less energy intensive than having to manifest a full body apparition. And I don't know how ghosts even operate. So they have to think about all the clothes they wear, all the accessories, how their hair looks. And, what if they mess up? Is that when you see their skull coming through or something like that? It's like, whoops, I messed up. I didn't mean to scare you. But my face just fell off because I forgot to think about it. So we don't really know. We have no answers for these things, just so many questions. But I wanted to share about the night side of nature, because a lot of times we will experience phenomena, and it's really exciting to be able to go back into the 19th century and to read about stories that come from England or Germany or other different parts of the world, and see that people are experiencing these same things. So to me, when you see a repetition of strange events, that means that it probably exists. So, like, let me connect it to the Mothman thing. So that my other YouTube channel is youtube.com/Mothman. And as you mentioned, in 2017, there was apparently this big flap in Chicago where over 50 people, over 50 sightings, let's say, from multiple witnesses, as reported, saw this Mothman type creature floating above Chicago. And
okay, so stop right there.
Yes.
So tell us exactly what a Mothman type creature is.
Yes. Okay. So the Mothman is a creature that was seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia between 1966 and 1967. And there's a great book and also a movie that was loosely based on the book called The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. And apparently there were over 100 witnesses that came forward publicly that they had seen this strange creature, which was later dubbed the Mothman. Now, it's a very dark, shadowy figure. It stands probably about 7 feet tall, is dark or black or gray in color, and has a wingspan of maybe 10 feet. So it's a huge creature, like a man bird. And but
like Batman.
yes, kind of, but interestingly, in the Point Pleasant instances, they talked about it having like no head, like it had this sunken like appearance, and then where your chest would be, it had these big red ominous eyes, and that filled you with existential dread. So if you were a witness, so this was seen in Point Pleasant again and again until about December 15th, 1967. And that's when the Silver Bridge collapsed. It was the bridge that was servicing Point Pleasant, and there were many people on that bridge that day returning from Christmas shopping. And unfortunately, the bridge collapsed and the cars all fell into the water and 46 people died. So it's a terrible tragedy that has no equal. I mean, this whole idea of the Mothman coming to Chicago is really unsupported, I found, because what happened in Point Pleasant seems to be a singular event. And to try to co-opt that heritage, I think, isn't valid, especially since, as I mentioned, there were over 100 witnesses that came forward publicly. That's why cryptozoological researchers can go back to Point Pleasant and still interview those witnesses, even so many decades later. And that's important for the advancement of the field, that we be able to do that, see that those stories remain consistent. So in the case of the Chicagoland Mothman, there was much ado about nothing, I feel, because you might notice that 2017 is the 50th anniversary of the Silver Bridge collapse. So the main purveyor of these accounts was able to have all these accounts happen in enough time so that he could write a book and put it out on December 15th, 2017, which is the 50th anniversary of the Silver Bridge collapse, the culmination of the original Mothman flap in Point Pleasant. Now, talk about the witnesses.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So, what were the months that the Mothman appeared in Chicago?
Oh, the months? Well, yeah. started in February, actually. Okay. I mean, the first account came to light in April, but then there were other accounts that came forward that attested that it started in about February, although there was a sighting that was apparently reported in 2016, and there were about 3 of them that were reported in 2011. So I went to all the 2011, okay. I went to that 2016, and I went to 50 something sightings of 2017. So I did all the 2017 sightings. And my idea for my YouTube channel was just go to the scene, because you got to get your boots on the ground and read the report and see what I see, hopefully find a monster. That's what I really wanted. But instead I found that the devil is in the details. In the nitty gritty, there were a lot of things that didn't match up. Some things were reported in the accounts that didn't have to do with the reality of the scene. Or I later found out from working with other researchers that there were disparities in the weather that was reported, or disparities in the moon phase that was reported. So things seem to be reported in such a way to fit a certain narrative, that was the idea that, oh my God, the Mothman has come to Chicagoland now. And this becomes clear when you realize, you know, the metropolitan area of Chicago, what is it, like 9 million people? You know, when you're talking about Point Pleasant in the 60s, you're talking about a few thousand people. To have 100 people willing to come forward and give their names was really impressive. In Chicago, we have 3 people that have come forward and given their names. One of them saw a Batmobile shaped UFO with like a scalloped wing, not a creature. Okay. Another one reported that he saw a pterodactyl type creature. And the third one said he saw a green mantis man leap off the Willis Tower. Okay, none of those are Mothman, but we have all these other reports where we don't have verifiable witnesses that say it's Mothman, but you can see from those 3 witnesses that those don't sound anything like Mothman, but they're still lumped into the Mothman category. Why? Because it's lucrative to promote that narrative. And I didn't want to face that's what was happening there, but I mean, I can't. Again, I just have to report what I see, no matter what it is. You know, if it makes me look like a traitor or a dork or whatever, I gotta just tell you what I got, and that's what I got.
Well, 2016 was when the Cubs won the World Series, and I had always thought about that as opening the first field of the apocalypse. And the Mothman thing seemed kind of like, you know, it seemed natural to me. I don't know. We'll see what happens next.
Right. Absolutely. Well, the Mothman reports keep coming in. There were some that were posted even today, but MUFON, for example, Chicago MUFON, Illinois MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, has received some of the reports. And in the reports they've received, they've been very suspicious. One of the things that they've seen is that the reports that they received, many of them are coming from the same IP address, which means they're coming from the same person, basically. IP addresses are used by the police all the time to track down perpetrators in crimes. So when you see the same IP address coming up, you've got to say to yourself, hey, I think there might be a problem with these reports. They're saying that they're coming from different witnesses, but in actuality, they're coming from one person or maybe a group of people that's trolling. You know, we all know that there's trolls about, and they just want to see what they can get away with. So, you know, we have to be cognizant of that, because I think that, again, when an eyewitness comes to you, that's something sacred. So we have to respect those eyewitnesses enough to weed out the trolls and not to get carried away with all these reports when they're probably being perpetrated by trolls. And if they're not, they're being perpetrated for a monetary reason, it sure looks like. So that's what I had to face. So although I'm skeptical, I'm not a cynic. I know that extraordinary things happen. I just think we have to be very careful and separate the wheat from the chaff. And that's what we really try to do at American Ghost Walks. When you lead a tour, because as I have, you know, now I'm just a researcher and writer, but I used to do it all. You know, I researched it, I write it, I led the tours, I did everything. And what I noticed is that people really want those bleeding walls. And I'm like, dude, I would give you the bleeding walls if I had the bleeding walls, but I'm not going to make anything up or trump anything up. I want everything to be honest. These are the stories that people tell, and I'm going to keep them sacred. And I think people in the paranormal as a whole who really care about it, investigators, being investigators, do the same thing.
One of the things that I found interesting, I mean, there are a couple of things about the Mothman stuff that you were involved in that I found really, really interesting. And the first one was when I found that YouTube channel, and I think you posted it on Facebook, and I saw it there first. and for anyone who wants to become a paranormal investigator or wants to try it out, I would highly recommend that you take a look at Allison's YouTube channel about the Mothman, because she's actually going to places and she's interviewing people. I think that's really fascinating. And the other thing was that 2017 Ghost Conference, besides being scared out of my wits by something that I'd be happy to tell you about in a little bit, you were on stage with a bunch of other investigators talk about the Mothman. And you know, and it's funny because you're in this place where you know, you see things and it's like, okay, this person's just making up, or this is happening. And there are about 5 people on the stage, and every single one of them were debunking the Mothman in Chicago. And it's like, okay, well, I guess it's not real if even these people don't believe it, you know. And I say that in a way that sounds kind of funny, because it's like, oh, well, even if they don't believe it, it must not be. But I think that it's true, where you have people who are interested in this stuff. They do want to find the bleeding walls, as you say. And you want to believe. I mean, I've had a couple of stories that I've heard be kind of swiped from me and told by some of the people, and it's interesting to where it's like, okay, well, this person tells you something. You know, it's like a game of telephone. You tell somebody something, and then somebody else does, and then somebody else does, and I found it interesting that game of telephone ended at the 2017 Chicago Ghost Conference on the Mothman, where it's basically a bunch of people saying, yeah, it's not true, it's not happening.
Yeah, well, but it doesn't seem to matter, because those stories, the same people keep pumping them out. So it must have been successful. And now they have merchandise, they have a couple of books, they have t-shirts you can buy. So I think there is a way that you can do this as a living, like we do with American Ghost Walks, but you don't need to make anything up. That's the idea with haunted history, is you just share people's stories. You don't make anything up to make it more exciting. You just tell what you really find. So I think there is a way, you know, that you can do this as your main vocation, and you don't have to make things up.
Well, I think that's part of, you know, for example, with my comic book. It's the history of Chicago, seen through the eye, blah, 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 blah. And the history in it is real. However, it's like being thrown into a bag and shaken around to make sure it fits into a certain narrative. And it's like, okay, well, this event happened here and this event happened here. And I'll tell you a quick story that I find interesting. That's real Chicago history. It was when the World's Fair of 1893 is ending. Ends on Halloween, of all times. But like a day or two prior to that, the mayor of Chicago gets shot and assassinated. And,
wow, I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
Holy crap. There was a lot going on that year.
Yeah, there really was. But the flip side of that is that they have a World's Fair in 1933. And the mayor of Chicago was assassinated then, but a couple months before the fair opened. So he was actually in Florida with Franklin Roosevelt right after he was elected. He wasn't even president yet. And they were at some rally, and somebody like came out of the crowd and started shooting at the president-elect, and it ended up killing the mayor of Chicago. Now you have the bookends of, you know, there's one mayor assassinated right at the end of a fair, and then there's another mayor assassinated right before the fair. And that's just coincidence, you know, unless you're writing a fictional story. Then you tie them together and it makes the whole thing more interesting.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, now, I'm talking a little bit about telling an exciting narrative. When Harold Washington died, which was in November of 1987, right before, and he was the mayor of Chicago for a number of years, and he had been like the first mayor to be reelected since the original Mayor Daley was mayor, and he had just been reelected the year before. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and he had this massive heart attack in his office and like dropped over dead. But interestingly enough, that Sunday was something else that was really infamous in the city of Chicago. There was somebody had pirated the airwaves, and the person had put I was going to say Man Max, but it's a Max Headroom mask on, and he broke into the 9 o'clock news, and he also broke into like Doctor Who later on. If you go on YouTube, you can find the video. And it was
I think I heard about that. That's so cool.
And it was just weird. It was just really strange. But people tend to forget that happened right before the mayor died. I mean, like within days. And you know, spoiler alert to anybody who's reading my book, I tied those 2 events together in the next issue of the book because it makes a great narrative. And and the history matches up. And if you're telling a story and you want it to be exciting, for example, I used to like the Untouchables TV series that was done in the 1990s, and they were using real life events. But the thing is, real life is boring. And it just is. You can't do a day-to-day thing. You know, you fall asleep. It's like, okay, who wants to watch this? So you jazz it up a little bit just to make it.
Or they do a lot of composites in Hollywood too.
Sure. So so I would highly recommend the Mothman YouTube. How many videos do you have on
there? About 80, because I also have other videos that I did. There's a few playlists. So one of the playlists is all the Chicago Mothman stuff, 60 some videos. And then another one is just paranormal interviews that I did where I just called up people, the head, the head of the Icelandic elf school in Reykjavik. So I just call him up on Skype, and we do like a Skype interview, which is really because I just wanted to talk to him. That's all that it is. You know, I just wanted to talk with Magnus over there in Iceland. I don't have money to go to Iceland. And so I just called him up and we did an interview all about the elf school because I love fairies. And so I interviewed people in different countries about the paranormal. And so I did about 10 of those, I think. And then I have some paranormal road trip videos where I when I go on vacation, I just try to go to all 100 places. And I've been doing that for years. And I thought, well, why don't I put that on the YouTube channel? I mean, I'm doing it anyway. Just turn the camera on. So that's another thing that you'll find there. And, you know, maybe I should repurpose that. I'm not really sure what to do, but it's kind of a grab bag. When you go to youtube.com/Mothman, you can find a lot of great interviews that have nothing to do with Mothman, or you can just watch all the Chicago Mothman videos. And the idea is for me to get on the scene, show you what I saw, and then present it in a way that people can make up their own minds. And I give very few conclusions. I just give you what I see and compare it at the time. And now, I mean, you're getting my conclusions here in this interview and in other interviews I did. And I might make a summation video at some point because, you know, I'm not saying that there's nothing incredible in the skies. I was in the, let's see, I think it was 2018 or maybe it was 2019, movie by Small Town Monsters, that's Seth Breedlove's company. He did a movie called Terror in the Skies, and he interviewed me. And what I really like about that movie is it talks about some of the extraordinary Thunderbird sightings throughout Chicagoland, and that interests me because back in 2000, I had a couple of people that I found that were from Wisconsin that had Thunderbird reports, and one of them is related to me, and I grew up with him. So I have a lot of respect for people seeing extraordinary things when witnesses actually are willing to come forward. Mm-hmm. When someone presents you a bunch of stories and you know they have a blog and they need to put content on that blog and they don't give any information about the people that they interviewed, well, what's to stop from them from just making up stories because they need content, or from taking people's stories and adjusting them to fit their narrative. So we have to think about all these things. But like I said, I'm not saying that nothing extraordinary was seen, because I know people have seen extraordinary things in the sky. And I also taught at a Native American school for 13 years. So in Wisconsin, amongst our 11 tribes, the Thunderbird is a very important character. It's a sacred being that still is very important to that cosmology. And every spring at the school where I worked, we would have a ceremony dedicated to the Thunderbird. So when you look at cyclical things, for example, you have this long history of Thunderbird lore amongst the Native peoples of not only Chicagoland, but also of Illinois. And then you also see cyclical newspaper reports where in the 1900s there were people seeing large birds, and then again in the 1940s, and then again in the 70s there was a whole path of Thunderbird sightings as if on a migrational path from Texas all the way up to Illinois. And actually even beyond that, there were some that were seen in Wisconsin at that time as well. So I think that there is something extraordinary going on, and we just have to keep our minds open to the possibilities, and possibilities that are supported by data, by, in this case, archival research, and not try to fit it into some narrative like the Mothman, which really captures people's imagination, and not sort of try to force it into that shape when it might be something completely different.
Well, there's another avenue too that we're not talking about, and I it's interesting because this is like the paranormal investigator, and all we're doing is like talking about how fake this is and how people are making this up and things like that. But people's minds tend to play tricks on them as well. And I know, for example, a couple of months ago, because of the fires in California, the sun looked really, really strange for a few days. Here in Chicago, and I'm not sure how it was in Wisconsin, but it looked really odd. And I remember I had gone outside and I was watching the sunset, and I was just like, wow, that looks like the end of the world. It looks like every movie that starts with the apocalypse. And I'm in the backyard, and the sky is kind of orange. And I look, and I see this plane, and we're not too far away from the airport. And I see this plane, which is unnaturally low. And it's like, you can almost look in the windows and see the people in it. It's like, it was really, really low. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's going to crash. I can tell it's going to crash because it's like, it's the beginning of every horror movie,
Right.
And it didn't crash, but it was one of those things where and this year has been so odd.
Oh yeah, this year has really reset reality for a lot of people.
It really has, and I think that you talk about something like the Mothman, and you interviewed somebody over by 1400 Lakeshore Drive that I thought was a really, really interesting video because I used to work in that building, but you interview people, and it's not even that they're necessarily making anything up to tell a narrative, as some people are, and it's I try not to look at that, because if I look at things from that perspective, you start to get cynical. It's like, oh, why do mail-in voting when the post office is just going to lose these things or throw them away? Right? You can't think like that. You can if you want to, but then how can you look at yourself in the mirror at night when you go to bed? It's like, it's just not the way we should be. There should be some kind of element of trust there. But on top of that, if you have an element like the oddness of this year, and on top of it, sun looking weird or a moon going dark in a way that it shouldn't, and it's just a natural phenomenon, but your mind immediately starts making connections.
Yeah.
And one example I have of that. So I grew up right over by Rose Hill Cemetery, like I mentioned. And one of the things with that cemetery that I know of is that I mentioned I walked through there and I felt unsettled. Well, it's not just inside the cemetery, it's also outside surrounding it. Now, I could almost see the cemetery from my front yard when I was growing up. And right after my mom had died, we walked into our house and we could smell the smell of roses. And there were no roses in the house. It was 3 men living together. So there were no roses anywhere, but we could definitely smell it. And it was just like, gee, I wonder what that was. Maybe mom came to visit us, maybe this, maybe that.
Right.
And a few weeks later, I was in the basement and I knocked over a bottle of her perfume that happened to be there. Well, the next day, my dad gets up and he's like, oh, I think mom paid us a visit. I smelled her perfume. It's like, yeah, that was me. But I didn't tell him that because he immediately made that connection. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to like ruin his good thoughts that, mom was coming back to visit. And I tell that story at conventions and it always gets a laugh. It's true. It's a true story. However, it does show the power of the mind and how we're able to make connections from this to that.
Absolutely.
However, now going back to a different story, there is I work in advertising. There's a client of mine who literally lives across the alley from my old house. And I was talking to her a couple of years ago when I ran into her, and we were talking about the neighborhood. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is where I live, this blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, something popped into my head, and I looked at her and I said, "Is your house haunted?" And she stopped, and it's like you could feel her blood run cold when I asked her.
Yeah.
That. And she said, "Why did you ask me that?" And I said, "I don't know." And she goes, "It's really strange because our house is a new construction, but my son swears that there is something in the house." That's right over by Rose Hill Cemetery. It's a block away, but there's that weird connection there. So, you don't know, sometimes you don't know what reality is from fantasy. And I think that sometimes there are logical explanations, and then there's times when there are not.
Right. And I'm open to alternative explanations. And I think when I'm speaking to you about today is kind of two-pronged, because I love telling stories, but I'm also an investigator. And I understand what you're saying about being an investigator. Wow, it can, when you see some of what passes for investigation, it can make you cynical. You can, I always joke that if I hadn't had my own experiences, my experience with the Mothman debacle would have made me run into the waiting arms of Richard Dawkins. I mean, I want to believe, and sometimes it's really hard when you see that other people want to believe so much so that they may be making things up or maybe changing some details to make something more dramatic. I understand what you're saying. If you have a personal connection to something, like your dad was having a treasured moment of connection where he's thinking about your mother, and there's no reason to take that away. I mean, there's no value in that. But when I see people possibly making up stories, I see the value in being critical of that, in that there are people, I know there are people that have had real experiences that they can't explain. And so for someone to say they're an investigator and then take stories from all different sources without being critical and just put them in the same basket as these are all valid, that's a problem, because you might have some people who really experience something and they're really looking for answers, and you put them in the same basket with a bunch of people that are just trollers and making up wild claims, or you put it in the same basket with something that's entirely different, like a UFO, but you want it to be Mothman. So you're okay with changing the narrative of what the witness reported and putting it into that basket.
So you saying that Mothman was really a flying saucer full of UFOs seeking to enslave us all? Is that what you're saying right now? Okay.
That's
so it's exactly like a scout ship from
So beware. They're out there. But you know, the best way that you can protect yourself is just that aluminum foil in your cabinet.
Okay.
Just make a little beanie and you'll be good to go.
So talk a little bit more about your the second YouTube channel.
Yeah. Okay.
History of women in paranormal investigation. I know that I've mixed the title around like 5 times.
Oh, that's okay. But again, people can just go to youtube.com/paranormal women. So you can go right to there. And the other one is youtube.com/Mothman. So I tried to keep it simple so people can get directly to it. Now, I've just started the Paranormal Women channel. So the purpose of it is I was just flabbergasted when I found out about so many different women that were active in paranormal investigations, and nobody even knows their names today. And when you think of people who are paranormal investigators, like most people might think of Zach Baggins as he's the pinnacle of the paranormal investigator. And I have a problem with that because he's a TV personality. He's not a paranormal investigator in my estimation of what that is. There are people today who study parapsychology, for example, and those people, to me, I mean, they're really looking for answers. They're not just putting something entertaining out there for TV. I mean, they don't have a vested interest in making things up. I mean, whereas there it is compromising to be in TV. Like you were saying, I mean, nobody's going to watch it if you just show paranormal investigations like they really are. Oh, they're so boring. And oftentimes nothing happens. And you really have to be dogged about it and keep going back to a location. And some of the phenomena can be very subtle. So that doesn't play well on TV. So it puts people who are, I would love to be on TV, I think. But then when you consider what you'd probably have to do to make your show exciting, I don't know if I'd be able to do it. Right. It would be a challenge of my conscience. So I've learned that there are incredible investigators out there from the 19th century and beyond that have really influenced all of us in the paranormal field, whether you're an investigator or a parapsychologist or just an enthusiast. You have been influenced by these women. You just don't know it yet. So one of the women is Catherine Crowe. She was a writer in the 19th century. She was a fiction writer originally. She wrote many mystery stories, and she became interested in parapsychology and in the paranormal because she read French and she read German fluently, and she was reading about all these discoveries in these other countries, and she decided she had to do something about it, and that's how she came up with this book, The Night Side of Nature, in 1848, and it became an international success and went through like 16 editions in like a couple of years because this book came out right when the spiritualist movement was getting underway. This doesn't talk about spiritualists. She talks about spiritualists in her later writing, but it hit at just the right time. So if you read it today, it's still relevant because it has so many phenomena in there. Poltergeists, of course, doppelgangers, OBEs, so out-of-body experience, NDEs, near-death experience, corpse candles, really anything you can think about that's paranormal, she compiled it in this book. So you can look at this book and learn about things that we're still experiencing today. So it's interesting to see it reflected so far back in time. And also it's interesting to see if our beliefs about these phenomena have changed at all by reading history. So Catherine Crowe she actually conducted the first paranormal investigation in 1854. Now, other people had done, religious types of confrontations of spirits, but she was actually the first one to uh, find out about a haunted house where she was living in Edinburgh, Scotland, and go to that haunted house with a group of witnesses and a clairvoyant and try to make contact with the spirit. So this was something that we would still recognize today as a paranormal investigation, where they had experiences and then they all talked about what they experienced there. And so, I mean, that's back in 1854, and we don't acknowledge her as the first paranormal investigator, but she really was. So there's a lot of women. I've done the Paranormal Women a Hidden History presentation at different conferences. And so I have a lot of different women that I'm going to be making videos about, because I've talked about, profiled many different women in my presentations, and so it takes a long time to make a video sometimes, but then you have it forever. So my idea for the channel is that there's so many important works of literature out there that we all could be learning from right now if you're really into the paranormal, and you don't have to go anywhere. So it meets those quarantine expectations, that you can still learn and not have to go anywhere. Many of these books that I talk about on my channel are free or very low cost. So again, it's something that everybody can do, and really you're able to learn a lot about paranormal investigation through looking back at our past. You can figure out where we're going in the future. And you can figure out like, who were these trailblazers and what amazing stories did they have in their lives. So there's going to be a lot of videos about a lot of different women, because many of these women were ahead of their time, and they really got into some interesting situations. And so it's fun to talk about their ghost stories or their paranormal experiences. And that's what the videos are about.
Now, I'm curious about something. So you mentioned the spiritualist movement of
Yeah.
The 1800s, and there were a lot of very, very interesting things happening at that particular time.
Right.
And the thing is, a lot of it was led by women. And you take a
Yes.
look at the New Thought movement, which
Yes.
is where this law of attraction stuff comes from.
Right.
And and part of that's an offshoot from Christian Science.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Unity Church and the Christian Science and the stuff
You
with the
got it.
minds, and there's things with this paranormal stuff. And Houdini was a debunker of a lot of different things. There was this idea, and I don't know if I have the story right, and if you know it, feel free to correct me on it. But Houdini had that thing with his wife where they tried. I think he died on Halloween, or they tried to.
He did.
And he was always trying to be contacted by his wife on Halloween, and
Yeah.
it was one of those things where it's like, oh, we're all going to sit around and the table's going to levitate and stuff like that. But the thing is, it was, if I don't contact you by this date, then this stuff doesn't exist, is what I understand the real story behind that was.
Right.
It wasn't like we're all sitting around waiting for the ghosts. Now, here in Chicago, we had these two women called the Bang Sisters, and they were over in the River North area, right over by where it used to be the Chicago Historical Society. Then it was like Excalibur, and it was that, and that place is supposed to be haunted as well. But they used to do fortune telling, and these pictures of people would appear on canvases behind them. And so, and I didn't even know about that until like a couple of years ago. And so there's all of this stuff that's out there. And it's not just the paranormal. It also deals with, it deals with, like I said, the New Thought movement and why things are being put together. And I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are, because there's a lot. And it was almost like, somebody just like dropped something right in that particular point in history, basically from like the 1830s to 1900, we'll call it. And,
Yeah.
and there's some bleed over into, there's probably bleed over on both sides. But a lot of the things we follow now are that stuff.
Right. I mean, it's
So
still affecting us today.
Right. So what's your take on that? What do you think about that? Where did that come from?
Well, I'm not.
What are the answers?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have the answers, but you're exactly right. About Christian Science and New Thought. These things very much still influence us today. And there's a book by Mitch Horowitz that talks about that whole history, and Dr. Dean Radin also has a book that covers that whole history. Very fascinating. And the book that I really like about the spiritualist movement is called Radical Spirits. And it's about the involvement of spiritualism in both abolitionism and the women's rights movement. So what's interesting for me is there's some people, that really believe that the spirits of the dead are all around us. That's the spiritualist religion, to believe that you can contact the spirits of the dead. But then there's other people who believe, no, those are demons only masquerading as your loved ones. But I really find that second idea, not that there's no demonic spirits. I mean, I think that there probably are, but because I also study exorcism and the history of exorcism in Wisconsin, for example. So, but I think if the demons were contacting the spiritualist, then wouldn't they have tried to mislead them into hate instead of really moving society in a progressive way? Like spiritualists that I've studied here from Milwaukee, like one of them, she was one of the first female doctors in the United States. Her name was Juliet Severance. And she was actually providing medical care to working women for free, amongst doing all her other activities, speaking publicly and advocating for women's rights and abolitionism and all these good things. So, I mean, if these spirits that are coming to us were really demonic spirits, why would they advocate for moving society in an ethical direction instead of, why wouldn't they try to sow hate instead of that? So I really think that something magical was going on with the spiritualists. I mean, we make fun of them. People look down on them because, they didn't understand photography. But understand that they really had an appreciation for things that we take for granted today, like social movements, like social beliefs in the equality of all people. And so when I look at spiritualism, I can only have admiration for them because I know that spiritualists really moved our country forward towards thinking of everyone as equal and important. And also, as you mentioned, the spiritualist movement gave women a position of power that they didn't have before then, at least in modern society. What we think of as, modern society, back in the 19th century, that kind of civilization, they had certain roles and they were able to take on this role of the medium, and they had this power, this extraordinary spiritual power. Now today, I think even in paranormal TV shows, we respect that women could be psychics or mediums, but what we lack is understanding that women can be investigators too. That women aren't only ghosts, like the black lady, the white lady, all these manifestations of spirits.
Like the
or
woman read at the Drake Hotel.
yes, or the poltergeist agents, like females are popular poltergeist agents, thinking that, it's maybe psychokinesis, maybe a spirit attachment. We don't really know. But, the idea that women are victims of spirits, or women can be mediums and psychics, but we still don't have a strong respect for the fact that women can be investigators. And so that's why I'm starting my channel, because there are women who laid the foundations for parapsychology and paranormal research, and they really blazed a trail, and we should appreciate that and know about them. And when we see a woman who wants to become an investigator, we should understand that women are perfectly capable of that and have a long history of doing that. And they, they're not just airy fairy, oh, I'm feeling something. They can be very analytical as well. I mean, there's different attributes that people have, and we just have to appreciate that women have this ability to be analytical and to really investigate something in a hard-hitting way.
That's really, really interesting. I know that we've been on the call for about 2 hours, so I think I'm gonna we should probably end it there. However, I think it'd be interesting to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, and did you tell me all your stories? You were talking about 2017 that.
Oh, I did not tell you about 2017.
Okay, well, why don't we just end it on that? Can you please?
Okay, so 2017, there was the Chicago Ghost Conference, which was no longer in Chicago. It was in like Lombard or something. It was in a strip mall in Lombard, which was the most unscary place on the face of the earth. I think there was like a McDonald's across the street.
Right.
And the space was this, we were kind of huddled together. It's like we were all kind of like, and it was kind of cute, because one of the things that I found there were a couple of people who did tarot card readings, and some of the people who were reading tarot cards were going to the other people and getting readings from them on the tarot. It was just it was really wild. But and then I saw your presentation on the Mothman, and there were other things that happened there. But where I was sharing a table with Amelia Cotter, who is a Chicago-based paranormal investigator as well, and we were like kitty corner from a place called the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. And I don't know if you walked over there or not, but they were like, I had a straight shot. I was looking straight at them the whole time. And what it is these people were going around the country with these different paranormal objects. It was almost like Friday the 13th, the series, only if they had opened up the
That's a deep cut.
I know most people won't know what that was. But it was funny because they had like this black mirror that you would look into, and if it would like wink back at you. I don't quite know what that was, but there was like a painting of a clown. Anything from your nightmares was there.
Right.
And there was a little doll they had. And I believe the name of the doll was Simon, because it had to be Simon. And it was like this little thing, this little doll that was in this little rocking chair. Again, it's straight out of any horror movie. And I go over and I'm talking to these people, and they're telling me these stories, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with you? You're doing what now? And and they said, yeah, well, we got him because somebody sent him to us. And they said that he had belonged to a little boy, and they felt that then the parents of the little boy felt that Simon, he was spending too much time with Simon. So they like took Simon away from him when he was off at school, and like stuck him in a burlap bag, and like tied him up and stuck him in the bottom of a trunk. It's right out of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. And that they found Simon years later. And then they told the little boy, who was now like a grown man, I think he had been married or something at that point, And they said, oh, hey, we found Simon. Do you want him back? And the guy was like, get rid of him now. He was telling me to kill you. You know, it was like,
Oh my God.
And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Simon. And we're kitty corner, you know, we're not super close, but we're not far enough away either. And I had this weird doll that I got at this Halloween store that I took, and it was frightening looking. You know, if anyone wants to go on my Instagram and just take a look at pictures of conventions, it's this frightening looking doll. And so, you know, we left that day. We left all of our stuff there at the you know, at the place in Lombard, and you know, Simon was right next. It was so close to my doll, and it's like, you know, I could just see my doll being affected by whatever they have over there.
Right,
and,
they're talking to each other.
Oh man, and so it was so weird and so creepy that I brought that doll home and I had her locked away for weeks, you know, in the bottom of a trunk. And it's like, she's not coming out for a while because she's scary enough as it is without being influenced by whatever dark magic is going on over there. And then, you know, the conference ends, or the convention ends, and I start following them on social media. And they're very nice, a married couple. They're really, really, really nice people.
Yeah, Greg and Dana Newkirk.
Yeah, right. And
people now know them from the popular series Hellier.
I did not know that, but I do know that they had been on a series even at that point.
Yes, and then now they have their own. They have 2 seasons of Hellier, and it's on Amazon and YouTube. And in season 2, my brother actually has a song. 2 songs that were included in the couple of the episodes. So it's exciting.
That's really funny. So the next day I'm looking at them on social media. It's that Monday after the convention, and they're in Bachelor's Grove with a Ouija board. And it was like some burned out Ouija board piece that had originated in Bachelor's Grove, and it was sent to them. And
they brought it back home.
And they brought it back home. And for anyone who does not know of Bachelor's Grove, I didn't know about it for a long time until I started doing the comic. I started going to the conventions and stuff. And Bachelor's Grove, I've heard enough about it now to where I'm skeptical. I'm never going. I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about it. And Ursula Belsky had written a book about haunted Bachelor's Grove, I think is the title of it. And it was funny because my sister-in-laws, I have 2 sister-in-laws, and they're always talking about this stuff. And, you know, they like to go roaming through cemeteries and stuff. And I'm telling them about it. And I'm like, yeah, there are these stories about Bachelor's Grove, and, you know, there are time slips and you get lost. And there's something in there that drains your energy and all kinds of stuff like that. And they're like, oh, let's go alone. You know, and I hand them the book. And my sister-in-law starts going through the book, and she's looking at it. And she's kind of reading parts of it. She's like, she throws it. She goes, the last thing I need is some demon following me home. You know, my life is complex enough without.
Oh, that ruined it for her.
Yeah, so the book ruined it for her. But the thing is, they went there with a piece of a Ouija board or something. It's just like, what is wrong with you? So I think Greg and his wife are very, very nice people. I think they're really special. I think their traveling museum is very fascinating, but I worry about them. And then the flip side of that is, so my story doesn't quite end there. A couple weeks later, I'm giving Halloween talks to, there are a couple of places in the area that host and feed older folks. And so I go to this one place and I'm telling them the story, and it was pretty funny because the people who were there were kind of like the Simpsons, you know, they kept like telling me the same thing, calling me like different names and stuff like that. But I'm telling the story, and then I start talking to one of the nurses, and I mentioned the traveling museum. They're like, they were here. They weren't here at the home, but they were at the hotel where I was. And she's like, I handled that stuff. I touched Simon. I did that. I was sick for weeks afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's, that's one of the, if you want a scary Halloween story, I guess it's the scariest one I've got. Without
Right.
going into legends, where it was just, we're in Lombard, Illinois, in the most unscariest place on the face of the earth, and it affected me for years to the point where I'm still talking about it.
Right. Wow. So yeah, those objects really have an effect
Sure.
on some people, and some other people like me, I just fondle everything.
Uh,
And I think I'm just not very receptive. I'm just not very sensitive to psychic things. So perhaps if I was more sensitive to it, I would have more experiences with it. But I tell people that I'm about as psychic as an old post. I mean, I really don't have anything going on there. And then when I'm at places and ask them if it's haunted, and it's funny because sometimes you'll hit somebody who yes believes that their place of business or their home is haunted, and they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, I just ask everyone.
well, how are you gonna know unless you
But
pray?
when it hits, it really makes it look like I have some spiritual power, but I have none. I'm not
So,
psychic at all.
so let's wrap it up there. Where can people find you?
Okay, so they can find ghost tours that we do at AmericanGhostWalks.com. And they can find Mothman stuff and other a grab bag of paranormal stuff at youtube.com/Mothman. And my most exciting offering to date is youtube.com/Paranormal Women. You're going to hear stories you've never heard before. So please check it out and subscribe.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all those links in the description. Hopefully by the time people see this, they'll be there. And you would just go down here, as I saw you do in one of your videos, which I have not done. That's correct. And then for anyone who is tuning in next month, I get to interview a comic book legend, which I'm very excited about. Thank you very much, Allison, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And have a great Halloween, everybody. Stay safe. I don't know if they're doing is trick or treating ended for you guys over by where you are? Or how's that?
We are having it in our community. Actually, okay. It's tomorrow night, so we're having a nighttime trick or treat.
Are there set hours?
Yes, we're having between 6 and 9. If you live in Glendale, Wisconsin,
well, that's a little bit
like a street away from Milwaukee.
Our set hours for our street are 5 to 5:30, so we're doing it very, very, very quickly. So yeah. So yeah, stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.